Do you suck at making beats? Do you want to be the next Tyler the Creator? Do you want to be the greatest producer of all time? If that's you, this is a video for you. Today, what I'm going to be doing is showing you laying on your bed, and you're watching this on your phone. I'm going to show you how to make the best Tyler the Creator, Call Me If You Get Lost, / Igor themed beat. We're going to be making a crazy beat switch, crazy distorted synths, crazy cool drums, crazy strings, piano patterns, synths, bow, 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 bow. All that. If that sounds like something that you want to witness, stay tuned. In a lot of Tyler the Creator's music, he kind of has these songs that have major beat switches within them. So it'll be one half of a song and then another half of a song, and they combine to make like a 4 or 5 minute track. So I tried to do something similar. First half's going to be Call Me If You Get Lost inspired, with kind of a very smooth sample, some drums, a lot of bongos, and soothing strings and piano. A little bit Afrobeat inspired, I guess. And then the second half is going to be like the Igor synths, like the crazy distortion, clipping drums, all that shit. So let's go into it. Okay, so the first thing that we're doing is we're finding a sample. Now, I've already found the sample, I've already chopped it up, all that stuff. Here's what the part that I'm sampling sounds like originally. After chopping it up, adjusting the attack, quantizing everything, and pitching it up, here's what that same loop sounds like now. So as I always do, I like to cut all the low end out of the samples to make room for my own bass line, which usually is similar but is a lot cleaner and can fit the exact drum patterns or whatever I'm feeling like doing. The next EQ that I have is at a point in the verse and in the second chorus, I have all of the highs cut out as well, so this is a low pass. And when this is going on, I still have the low pass, so really you're only getting the mids in the sample when this is occurring. So here's what that looks like. On top of that, I have a little bit of reverb, just a smidge to kind of make it feel a little bit wider, I guess. I have a tiny bit of Soundgodizer, which I feel kind of brings out the high notes a little bit, which I liked how it sounded on this sample. I don't always like it. And then finally, I have an EQ that lowers the highs a little bit when the low pass is not in effect. And right around 300 hertz, I have that lowered as well, because I figured that's a very muddy frequency, and I don't like it all too much. So I have those two things that just affect it a little bit. Now on top of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another part of the sample and I'm going to really heavily chop it to kind of give it a completely different vibe, even though it's the same sample. So here's what the sample chopped up sounds like. Okay, so those are our two parts of the sample that I'm going to use, and I'm going to build this first half of the track around that. So first thing we're going to start off with is the piano. What I always like to do is when I'm using a sample, I always like to try and hear and try and figure out the chords of the piano, which is never 100% accurate, but I'm getting better at doing that. So here is what the chords sound like. For the piano, as I always do, I hit Alt-S, creates the strummer so that all the piano notes aren't hitting at the same exact time. And then I hit Alt-R, which randomizes the velocities or volumes, as well as a little bit of the panning of each note in the piano chords. So the next thing that I did was I added a pretty reverby string pattern to go and be layered in with the piano chords to kind of give it more movement and a little bit more depth. And I really have the strings playing quiet, I usually do. So here's what this string pattern sounds like. And then here's what the strings pattern sounds like with the piano. Similar to the piano, I have the volumes randomized a little bit. I usually do that with all my things. Following the strings, the last thing that I added that is more melodic is the bass line. So here's what the bass line for most of the first half is going to sound like. I have a slightly altered one for when the vocal chops come in, and then here's the bass line for when the vocal chops are different. Next thing we're going to go into is the drums. I tried to make these drums feel as Call Me If You Get Lost as possible without, copying something directly from the album. So first we'll start off with the kick pattern. Here's what the kick sounds like. And then after that, I added my snares and my perks. So here's what the snares and perks sound like. And now here's what my hi-hats sound like. And then finally, to give it more of a Call Me If You Get Lost feel, I added a lot of bongos and toms hitting. So here's what all of that sounds like. So now let's start layering these things on top of each other. First, we're going to layer the hats with the bongos. And then finally, we're gonna, all the drum sounds, making it into one loop. Continuing with going into the verse, we're going to look at some piano ear candy that I put in there, some very high notes that hit pretty quietly, but just to give the chords a little bit more movement, since the sample is going to be EQ'd. You kind of need something in that high register to keep a listener intrigued. So here's all of the pianos that I layered that are going to be in the first 8 bars of the verse. So here's what all those combined sound like. And with all of my pianos, these ones especially, I used to completely roll off all low frequencies, but now I kind of just diminish their volume, but I still keep them in there so it gives it a little bit more depth. So yeah, always EQ down the lows in your pianos. And then similarly, I always try to EQ right around 300 to 400 cents down. I find it's a really bad frequency. It gets everything really muddy. So here is the chorus for the first half of this Tyler, the Creator beat. Here is the first part of the verse of this first half. And now for the second half of the verse, this is where I have the sample chops that I mentioned earlier. We're just looping the drums. We're not doing anything too crazy with the arrangement. We might take the hi-hats out at some point. We might take the snares out or something like that. So here's what all that sounds like. that's going to be the first half of this beat. That's going to be more Calm If You Get Lost themed. Now we're going to go into the Igor half. What I did was I made a really nice transition between the first half of the beat to the second half of the beat. It links them together pretty seamlessly, and I really like it. What I did was slightly chopped up the sample loop, and I created different chords out of the vocal sample than I did for the first half. So here is what the new vocal sample loop sounds like. And here's what those piano chords that I created off of that loop are like. So what you'll see is that the first two chords are the same chords from the first half, just twice the speed. And then that last chord is a completely different chord. I don't know what the name of it is, but it gives a cooler vibe, something. And as always, I hit Alt-S to make the piano notes strum, and then I hit Alt-R to randomize the velocities of those notes. So here is what the transition between the first half and the second half sounds like. Now we're going to go into the second half of this beat. So what we're going to do first is we're going to continue that transition piano chord progression. Now I'm going to take the very low notes out of that, and I'm just going to keep the higher notes of the chord progression in there. So you can see it on your screen right now. The first half has these bass notes, and the second half of the piano progression has no bass notes. In order to create this iconic Tyler the Creator Igor sound, what we have to do is really dive deep into like these crazy synth sounds. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to have the same notes that are played in the piano chords be played on a synth, but I'm going to have the synth hit later than the piano notes. So you'll hear the piano notes hit first, and then you'll hear the synths hit afterwards, so you can kind of get this call and response going on between the two. And then I'm going to bring in this crazy synth distorted bass that I've created. What I'm going to do to create this distorted synth is I'm going to take one sound that I got from Flex, and we're going to apply a lot of distortion, a lot of different effects in order to get it more distorted. So the first thing, like I always do with my sounds from Flex, I decrease the attack so it hits a lot faster, decrease the release almost to nothing. The stock reverb and the stock delays I get rid of completely, and the hold I increase so that when I play the note on my keyboard it holds out for as long as I want instead of it cutting out after half a second. Next, I EQ'd up the bass a little bit, and I EQ'd down the high mids and the very, very high notes. Next, we go into this plugin called FX. It's Effector to stock plugin in FL Studio. I just clicked on the distortion tab and I played around with the plugin until I found a level of distortion that I really like. And then to cap it off, I also put fruity fast distortion on the synth just a little bit. And now here is what the synth sounds like. To make the synth even more distorted, I took Funky Electricity, it's another stock sound from Flex, and I cut out almost all of the lows and cut out the very, very highs. So all you have is really this staticky sound. It really just sounds like static. So here's what that sound sounds like. And alone, that sound is horrible. But when you layer that on top of the other synth, it sounds like a synth is really distorted. So here's what both of those sounds layered on top of each other sound like. On on top of that, I had the pitch of the synth bass fluctuate like crazy by either 1 or 2 octaves to kind of give it like a really distorted and fucked up sound. Now, I don't have that continue through the rest of the beat. I just have it for that single part, just to give it like a cool feeling, and then we go back to like a normal bass line. 2 more things involving this second half of the beat. I added this synth arpeggio that, you know, Tyler the Creator and Igor era kind of had a lot of these like synth arpeggios where it's like the short staccato synth notes going. I made kind of a more unique pattern. So here's what the synth arpeggio pattern sounds like. And then the final thing that I added is another plugin from Flex. It's another synth called 70s Bounce, and I kind of just made a pretty simple lead, just something to give the chords a little bit of movement. So here's what that sounds like. Now, the drums on this second half are really simple. I just had a kick, 2 snares layered, another snare that kind of gave it a little bit more movement, a perk to give it similarly just a little bit of movement, and then a crash. So no hi-hats, no shakers, nothing like that. So here's just what all of the drums together sound like. Now here's what the entire transition from the Call Me If You Get Lost half to the Igor half sounds like. And then obviously we have our drums come in, the crash come in, and the normal bass line come in, and then the second half of the beat will play out as its own half. So here is what a little snippet of that will sound like. That wraps it up for our Tyler the Creator Igor Call Me If You Get Lost style beat. The link to it will be in the description. The link to Kyle's YouTube channel will be there too. For more behind the scenes content, you can find that over on his channel, as well as things like me playing basketball and destroying all my friends. Yeah, so I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, please hit that thumbs down button. Please unsubscribe. Turn the notification bells off, and make sure you leave a comment that's so degrading that it's gonna make me cry tonight. Okay? That's your job. If you made it this far in the video, comment about how handsome I look.